After hours of tense exploration, the basement suddenly went unnaturally quiet. Even their breathing seemed amplified, echoing faintly along the walls. From somewhere deep in the basement, a faint whisper floated on the air. It was soft, almost pleading, yet unmistakably real. The whisper shifted from wall to wall. The students could not determine its origin. It seemed to move independently, circling them. Slowly, the whispers formed words. "Why are you here?" The tone was cold and hollow, yet tinged with sorrow. Shadows along the walls elongated and warped, reaching toward the students as if drawn by the sound of their fear. A cold draft rushed from the far corner, lifting dust and paper into swirling spirals. The whispers became louder, almost urgent. The whispers shifted, merging into faint, hushed screams. The sound was haunting, childlike, yet desperate and pained. The walls seemed to vibrate subtly, as if the building itself were speaking. Each brick pulsed slightly in rhythm with the whispers. One student stumbled, nearly dropping a folder. The others grabbed them, their hands trembling. The air felt heavy with unseen presence. The whispers rose in volume, forming multiple voices at once. The basement echoed with overlapping tones of despair, anguish, and warning. A flickering overhead light cast moving shadows across the walls. Each flicker revealed shapes resembling children watching, faces blurred and hollow. Despite fear, one student stepped forward, drawn by the voices. The floor creaked beneath them, amplifying the echoes of their movement. The voices now seemed all around them, coming from the floor, walls, and ceiling. The sound was disorienting, almost tangible. In fleeting glimpses, shadowy figures appeared in the corners. Children with hollow eyes and pale, expressionless faces. They vanished when looked at directly. Dust and debris rose in spirals from the floor, reacting to unseen movements. The whispers grew louder, sharper, like warnings. Each student felt their heartbeat amplified, thudding in rhythm with the unseen voices. Fear pressed down, heavy and suffocating. One voice spoke a name, one of the students. It was drawn out, chilling, as if the basement knew them intimately. The group froze completely, unable to move. The whispers encircled them, pressing closer, carrying centuries of pain and warning. The basement was alive and it was aware. Students froze as a subtle movement flickered at the edge of their vision. Shadows seemed to coalesce in one corner of the basement, forming a dark, undefined shape. Two dark, hollow eyes appeared within the shadow. They seemed to pierce the darkness, staring directly at the students, unblinking and unervingly still. The figure slowly floated above the floor, indistinct yet undeniably present. Its form blurred at the edges, as though reality refused to fully shape it. The apparition took the form of a young girl, small and fragile-looking, her features pale and expressionless. The students' hearts thumped violently. Her eyes were hollow voids, dark and endless, reflecting the dim light from flickering bulbs above. A chill spread through the room. As she floated forward, the basement seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching toward the students like liquid tendrils. A soft, childlike voice echoed, "Leave now." It was both pleading and commanding. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the warning. One student extended a hand, almost instinctively, toward the apparition. The air grew icy. Frost curled around their fingers as if the presence rejected touch. The apparition did not move except to drift slowly closer. Her gaze, though expressionless, seemed to pierce through the students, revealing every fear they held. Shadows along the walls writhed unnaturally, stretching and curling around the apparition, amplifying her otherworldly presence. Dust rose in spirals around her, lifted by invisible currents. Each particle caught faint light, making the air shimmer with the apparition's movement. The metallic odor of old blood intensified as she drifted closer, making the students gag slightly. Fear coiled tightly in their stomachs. Soft, childlike whimpering accompanied her, echoing from every corner of the basement. The sound seemed to come from inside their heads. The flickering light above caused the apparition's form to split briefly, multiplying into several ghostly copies before snapping back into one. Instinctively, the students stumbled backward, knocking over rusted chairs and instruments. Every sound echoed like a gunshot in the vast basement. Despite their retreat, the girl moved forward slowly, silently, her hollow gaze never wavering, freezing them in terror. The temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the floorboards, and the students' breaths came out in visible puffs. Fear pressed down like a physical weight. The students froze completely. The ghostly girl hovered a few feet away, silent and immovable, her presence filling the room with centuries of sorrow and warning. Beyond a narrow archway, a door emerged from the shadows, partially hidden by cobwebs and dust. Its metal handle was cold and pitted with rust. Close-up of student pushing rusted basement door open, dim lights, flickering light in decayed operating room, shadows forming fleeting humanoid shapes, close-up of glass jars on basement shelves, murky liquids with preserved specimens, some broken, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, horror interior, old surgical notes scattered across floor and tables, handwritten patient names and procedures, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie abandoned interior, metal surgical tray falling in abandoned operating room, dim flickering light, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie horror interior, students turning to faint footsteps in abandoned operating room, long shadows along walls, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie interior, students shivering in dim, abandoned operating room, cold breeze visualized as subtle mist, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie atmosphere. Old scalpels and hooks lay on the tables, their rusted blades gleaming faintly in the flickering light. The tools appeared ready for use, though decades old. Scratched into the walls were symbols and words, desperate cries and incomprehensible marks, etched by hands long gone. Shadows moved across the tables and walls, unconnected to the students' movements. They appeared to be watching. A chair tipped over slowly, scraping the floor. The sound reverberated as though amplified by unseen forces. The odor of blood and rust thickened, making the students gag. The air seemed saturated with decades of horror. Soft whispers drifted from the corners of the room, unintelligible but urgent. The students huddled together, hearts racing. A shadowy figure appeared briefly near a table, a young patient, expressionless and hollow-eyed, before vanishing instantly. Notes and sheets rustled without wind. Some flipped pages revealing horrifying diagrams of surgical procedures on teenagers. The students felt the room itself observing them, every shadow and corner alive with unseen eyes. They could not look away. The horrors of the past pressed in on all sides. The students' breathing became erratic as the basement seemed to close in. Every echo amplified their panic, bouncing off walls that had witnessed decades of horror. The faint whispers grew louder, layering over one another until it was impossible to tell where each voice came from. One student fixated on a shadow in the corner, eyes wide. The figure seemed alive, writhing and twisting, yet remained just out of reach. The wooden floorboards beneath them groaned as if under the weight of unseen footsteps. Each creak echoed like a heartbeat in the silence. The walls appeared to warp slightly, stretching and bending as though breathing. The students felt dizzy and disoriented. A distant, faint scream echoed from somewhere deep within the shadows, carried desperation, making every student flinch. Shadows twisted and lengthened, crawling along the walls like living things, encroaching on the students' space. An icy draft swept through the room, swirling dust and paper into ghostly spirals around the students' feet. Faint, pale faces appeared in the shadows for split seconds, hollow eyes, open mouths, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. One student's hands shook uncontrollably, papers slipping from their grip. Every attempt to steady them failed. The whispers morphed into cruel, mocking laughter. It echoed unnaturally, ricocheting off walls and ceilings, disorienting the students. The overhead lights flickered violently, casting jagged shadows that leapt across the walls and floors. The walls seemed to whisper the students' names, drawing closer with each syllable, making them flinch involuntarily. One student let out a sudden scream, stumbling backward into another. The sound echoed and mingled with whispers and laughter. Shadowy figures flickered at the edges of the room. Children, pale and hollow-eyed, seemingly trapped in the basement for eternity. The students felt their heartbeats pounding in sync with the unseen whispers, pressing against their chests like physical weight. A sudden gust of wind blew through the basement, rattling rusted instruments and sending papers spinning into the air. The students froze completely. The basement seemed alive, breathing around them, every shadow and whisper amplifying their terror. In the corner of the basement, a small iron door appeared, barely visible in the shadows. Its surface was corroded, and the hinges creaked with the weight of age. One student approached cautiously, the rest following hesitantly. A metallic chill emanated from the door, raising goosebumps along their arms. A faint push caused the door to shift. It groaned loudly, revealing a narrow interior, dark and suffocating. Without warning, the door slammed shut. The metallic clang echoed through the basement, startling the students. One student realized they were trapped inside. The cold iron walls seemed to constrict around them, oppressive and unyielding. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Words repeated, "Stay forever." The voices seemed to come from the walls themselves. The walls were scratched with desperate marks. Names, dates, pleas for release. Some were still fresh, as if recently made. The cold inside the cell was intense. Every exhale formed visible mist, swirling around the student's face. The floor beneath trembled slightly, as if the building itself were alive. Shadows danced across the walls, distorting reality. Student recoiling from metallic scent inside locked iron cell, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie abandoned interior. Echoing sounds visualized as subtle air distortions in iron cell. Student reacting in fear, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie interior. Distorted shadows stretching along iron cell walls towards student, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie abandoned interior. Close-up of iron cell corner with subtle scratches appearing, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie abandoned interior. Dim iron cell with swirling ghostly mist representing anguished cries, student covering ears, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie interior. Close-up of student fingers tracing rusted iron wall scratches, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie abandoned interior. Rusted iron door rattling slightly inside basement. Student pressed against wall, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie interior. Frost forming along iron cell walls and door edges. Student shivering, hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie abandoned interior. Wide shot of student frozen inside rusted iron cell. Shadows and swirling mist pressing in. Hyper-realistic 8K, cinematic suspense, eerie abandoned interior. On a rusted table, a tray of surgical instruments lay in eerie silence. The metal gleamed faintly under the flickering lights. One student hesitated, touching a scalpel. The metal was icy, sending shivers up their arm as if it were alive. The instruments reflected faint, unnatural glints of light, casting long shadows that seemed to twist unnaturally on the walls. A rusted mallet lay among scalpels and hooks. Its handle was splintered, yet it exuded an ominous presence. Old surgical scissors and clamps were scattered, some tipped over. The arrangement seemed almost deliberate, as if set for a procedure. The metallic odor of blood and rust intensified near the instruments, making the students recoil involuntarily. A scalpel twitched, as if nudged by an invisible hand. The students gasped, frozen in place. The flickering lights made the instrument's shadows leap across the walls, forming grotesque shapes that danced like specters. A chill swept through the room. Dust and rust particles lifted into spirals around the instruments, as if the air itself were alive. Without contact, a scalpel slid slowly across the tray, as though drawn by some unseen force. The whispers returned, now sharp and urgent, circling the students, emanating from the instruments themselves. Clamps and hooks toppled off the tray simultaneously, clanging against the metal table. The noise echoed, bouncing off the walls. A cold sensation brushed a student's arm, causing them to jerk back. The instruments had seemingly reached for them. Faint reflections of ghostly faces appeared in the rusted metal, eyes hollow and staring. A subtle hum emanated from the instruments, vibrating the air, almost audible in the students' chests. One student bravely extended a hand toward a scalpel. Frost formed around their fingers instantly, as if the metal resisted touch. Shadows from the instruments stretched and twisted in impossible directions, coiling like living tendrils around the students' feet. The students froze completely. The tray seemed alive, the instruments pulsating with centuries of cruelty, and the whispers pressing in from every corner.